Good morning, teachers. This is Lillian McFarland, and we are on session 4 of our communication chapter for our Child Development Associates in Infants and Toddlers. Session 4's title is Fostering Writing Development. In this session, participants will learn methods of supporting the writing development of infants and toddlers. The ability to write develops over time as children receive the experiences, materials, and practice they need to control their mark making. The stages shown here are from the National Association for the Education of Young Children. They have a publication in Young Children about emergent writing. As a supplemental, we have an article from 0 to 3 titled Learning to Write and Draw. So for our infants and toddlers, we are looking at the 2 stages that are bolded. The first stage, the random scribbling, which is definitely experimental stage, where a child has some way to make a mark, and they randomly move their arms and perhaps their wrists and fingers, and accidentally produce those first few marks. As they develop, the mark making becomes intentional rather than accidental. And as they move on to stage 2, they have developed enough control of their arm, hand, and fingers to be able to intend to make a mark and then create the mark, to intend to move their hand to one side of the paper or one side of the concrete or one side of the sandbox, and to intentionally move that limb and to control the material to be able to make a mark. The first 2 stages, random scribbling and controlled scribbling, are procedural knowledge. During the stages of writing, there are 2 kinds of knowledge, procedural and generative. Procedural knowledge is knowing the mechanics of how to make that mark on the paper, how to shape a letter, what letter can be attributed to what sound. They know for procedural knowledge the alphabet code. Also within procedural knowledge is having multiple opportunities throughout the day to develop fine and gross motor skills. Generative knowledge is all about how children can convey meaning through their marks, translating thoughts into writing. Generative knowledge is created through teacher modeling of how they express themselves orally and how they show they can communicate with different forms of writing and drawing. So writing a story with the children, writing notes in a child's chart, creating lists of what they might need the next day, taking messages for families. Children can also participate by dictating things that the adult can write down and sharing ideas orally. In 0 to 3, in the Learning to Write and Draw article, they point out that for very young children, drawing and writing is one and the same. Making that mark on the paper and moving from random to controlled to thinking about what you're going to put in that it might represent something are the same in writing and drawing. Children do not move through these stages at precisely the times listed, the months listed. Some children can be more precocious and have more exposure and more experience and more desire to make marks and to express themselves, and others might develop more slowly. There's no right and wrong as far as adding an extra 6 to 8 months onto something, but by offering repeated experiences over time with the motor development and with the mark-making materials, you will see forward progress. So in order for the average child to make marks, they need to develop their whole arm, whole hand, and then finally get down into their fingers and their grip. So the resource that I pulled for this in particular is from the state of Victoria in Australia, an emergent literacy fine motor resource. Also, we're going to be using our textbook, The Essentials for Working with Young Children for CDA. And if you'll remember in our physical development chapter, we talked about how the child develops from their center outwards. So the large muscles, the limbs move with coordination before the fingers, hands, feet, toes move with coordination. And in order to have good fine motor development, you have to start with the whole arm, which is gross motor and refers to the shoulder, upper arm, and forearm. Then getting down to the whole hand and the development of the muscles essential for grasping and the coordination of finger movements. Whole hand development is seen in very young children. You might notice that younger children, especially infants and toddlers, will prefer to grasp objects with their whole hand rather than using two fingers in a pincer movement. You can keep this in mind when providing materials and have materials that are easily held with a whole hand grip. Fine motor control develops through experiences. If you're ever working in an infant room, you'll know that the baby can zero in on the tiniest little speck on the floor and take an inordinate amount of time to nudge their fingers in such a way that they can very delicately pick up the speck to examine it further. All of these muscles need to be developed by providing experiences every day for the use of the whole body, the use of the arm, the hand, and as the babies develop, they will find opportunities for a pincer grip and to use their fingers to pick up things. A good way to promote this is also through providing, once they've moved on to solid foods, to providing small pieces on the tabletop or tray that they can maneuver their fingers to examine and pick up to feed. So as an educator, you will have many opportunities to help develop a child's fine motor skills. The resources I pulled these ideas from are Penfield Building Blocks and the Children's Hospital of Richmond. Both sources agree that, to begin with, the best thing you can do is provide supervised tummy time. So the baby needs to push up, shift from side to side, and eventually they're going to be swiping at the objects in front of them and reaching out with their whole arm and support their body weight with their other arm. This does need to be supervised. A 3 to 6 month-year-old learns to push up on their elbows in prone, which is laying flat, and eventually is able to push up onto their hands. So that's the center to outward development there. These are important for shoulder stability and arch development in hands. As your child gets a little older, you can do finger feeding, as we first discussed, by putting small pieces out for a child that can eat solid foods, and that helps them develop the pincer grasp. You can give small materials to play with. Those have been called manipulatives or small toys. Keep in mind that small toys are a choking hazard, so you have to be very selective to curate what is put out for the children. Finger painting is also a great thing to do for small children. You have to decide what materials are appropriate for finger painting. Two-handed tasks are great for small children. So an example of this is you roll a ball towards a baby and they can pick it up with two hands. So that indicates that it should start with a larger ball and then work your way down to a smaller one that they'd be more inclined to pick up with one hand. Encourage the baby to roll the ball back with two hands, to throw it with two hands. You can do Play-Dohs in clay. So in the picture here, you see a child working with actual potter's clay. That is much more difficult to maneuver than a nice soft Play-Doh. I would recommend starting with a modeling dough that either you make or a commercial one like Play-Doh for the children to start developing hand muscles. And then as they develop their muscles and are stronger, by all means introduce a potter's clay, because it takes so much pressure and strength in the fingers to manipulate potter's clay that it's really great for building strength. You can practice with clothespins. So find some clothespins that are appropriate for this age group. You can have it for a sensory table, for children that are wanting to wash. Perhaps you have a sensory table full of bubbly water and some laundry items like socks or baby clothes, and they can pretend to wash those and have a little line strung up that they can pinch the clothespins and hang up the wet laundry. Coloring is great if you can find materials that are appropriate for that age group. In the Children's Hospital of Richmond, they also note that for the development of motor skills, children also need to be able to see and feel what is in their hands in order to interact with or manipulate objects. To help your baby develop visual skills, they say that you can get close, so about 12 inches from the baby's face, so the baby can look at you carefully. You can provide colors in the environment. As they get to be about 3 to 6 months old, they enjoy seeing objects with increasing color. Now, that doesn't give you license to paint your whole classroom in various shades of rainbow and sparkles, because that can then overstimulate. But to provide materials that do have some color, so you do have your natural tones in the environment, but also expose them to other colors as well. It also says you can expose your baby to different enriching visual environments by having the baby carried through or held in different parts of the house or different parts of the center, indoors, outdoors, so they can see the world. For sensory skills, the Children's Hospital of Richmond article says that positioning and our positional sense is very helpful for developing writing skills. So to develop positional sense, it says it's nice to have carrying the baby a variety of ways, either on your shoulder, in a rocking chair, laying on their stomach across your lap, snuggled into a pack. These are all great ways to help the baby feel where they are in their environment. The Children's Hospital also recommends infant massage to develop a touch sense or tactile awareness. And it says to gently massage the baby's arms, legs, and trunk to stimulate their tactile awareness. And it also mentions that it's a great way to bond with the baby. In the third picture in the top left, you'll see that there's a bead stringing activity. I have heard a therapist speak before, recommending bead stringing for infants and toddlers, older infants and toddlers. For children that are unable to hold the lace that is usually quite limp, to be able to string a bead is initially difficult. So if you can find something with a bit more rigidity to it, and in this picture a parent chose to use a chenille stem as their thread, then that can support the developing of the two-handed skill to be able to hold the thread with one hand and the bead with the other and be able to make them come together. Writing for purpose. The resources for this slide come from the National Association for the Education of Young Children, Emergent Writing, and FoundationYears.org, Mark Making Matters. Children learn from teachers modeling the purpose of writing and having opportunities to interact with others on writing projects. Teachers can think aloud as they're writing and choosing what to write down. They can explain what they plan to write. Teachers can set up environmental print in the classroom through labels, teacher-made books, and family materials such as posters of the family with labels on who's who, to help children realize the purpose of print, that these abstract marks actually have meaning. In Foundation Years, Mark Making Matters, The booklet suggests that teachers should provide opportunities for children to see adults writing and to encourage children to experiment with mark making themselves, that teachers should value children's mark making as practical explorations, and to make sure children feel secure in the environment enough to take a risk and try new ways to make marks and new materials. Teachers should work alongside children with those materials to show possibilities. Taking dictation. So this is a commonly used practice, and the resource I pulled for it is from readingrockets.org under Strategies and Dictation. So the process of dictation is writing down essentially what somebody else is saying. With young children, the reason you might be doing this is because they have created a piece of artwork to express a thought and don't yet have the developed writing skills to convey that. If a child allows a teacher to take dictation, this gives the child the opportunity to see the adult writing, to hear the adult sounding out words and forming letters. It can model that speech can be written down and read back again. To get children familiar with taking dictation, one thing you can do is with a small group, write down a story that they're creating together or write down a recipe they're creating together on a big board so they can see what you're doing. And later on, when you do it with individual children, you can pull out a little sticky note or a blank sheet of paper or flip their paper over on the back and write down what the individual is saying. I recommend the sticky note because due to my art training in early childhood, I have been trained that it's ruining a child's artwork by the teacher writing upon the front of it. The front of it is what the child has done and does not need an adult to make modifications to. So if you'd like to do dictation on a child's artwork, it is advisable that you use something to attach to the artwork in some way that is removable and doesn't damage what the child has created. Writing materials. So what should or what can you use for infants and toddlers? Well, the biggest challenges are that everything goes into a baby's mouth. Everything. It's how they discover what's going around in their environment. They also have a very small larynx and trachea. These are a combined problem that leads to choking. To be on the safe side, you should have either a choking tube, which is one of those official little clear plastic tubes that you can buy to check for choking hazard size, or if you prefer, you can use a toilet paper roll tube, one of the old standard ones, and that's a slightly bigger and should improve your chances even more that if something doesn't fit in that tube, odds are it's not going to be stuck in a baby's windpipe. So, check your items to make sure that they're not choking hazards. Also, check your items for durability. So, some jumbo crayons are large enough to not be a choking hazard, yet once they are tossed on the floor or stepped on by a young child, they break into smaller pieces. So if you have a material that is of a more crumbly or temporal nature, watch. Be close by and watch. If something starts breaking up, you're going to need to gather the small pieces and dispose of them away from the children. Another thing to consider is toxicity. If they put enough of this ingredient in their mouth, is it going to make them ill? So there you go. Most products, if you look on the back, have a label saying whether it should be kept out of reach of children or non-toxic. If it's kept out of reach of children, I'm really sorry, you're going to have to keep it out of reach of children. And I was horrified the other day when I learned that shaving cream has that label on the back of it. So if your center's still using shaving cream, be aware that that label's on there. If you choose to still use it, you need to be on the spot to make sure none of that goes in a child's mouth. In the pictures on this page, you will see crayons, the little pieces that have been retained by the teacher and melted down and formed into a size that is not a choking hazard. And then on the left, you will see children painting with water. One of the cheapest things you can get to paint with outside is water. I highly recommend you get a variety of brushes and let the kids have at it. You can change the water frequently if you notice those brush heads are going into mouths. But it's a great way to mark make outside and still get the satisfaction of drawing, but not have to worry at all about the children getting sick from it. Some centers allow the use of food-grade materials for artwork, such as yogurt or pudding or Kool-Aid packets, that kind of thing. You have to check with your center before you pull out the food to play with and make artwork with. Some centers believe that is misuse of food that is a scarce resource. So there you have it. Check and make sure that everything is safe to use for mark making before you give it to the children. Last thought, our markers, washable markers, are great, and paint daubers are great. The only problem with both of those items are their caps. So if you can find a way to either you hang on to the caps and just give the child the body of the marker or paint dauber to play with, and then, pick them back up when they're done and put back on the caps. Or if you can find some way to adhere the cap to a large material that won't separate, then that's another option as well. All right, that's it for fostering writing development. I hope you all have a great day. Here's the bibliography for this presentation.